you've got to consider that maybe they're banking on President Trump or former President Trump to become President Trump again, and that in that case, he could give himself pardoning authority as president. So it would behoove him to push this trial out as long as possible.
Court is expected to set a trial date tomorrow for Donald Trump to face election fraud charges. Caitlin Doornbos is Washington, D.C. reporter for the New York Post.
This is going to be in his D.C. case. That is the case that is about the election overturning, and they are going to try to set a trial date at that hearing. Now, what we've seen from Donald Trump in the past is they're trying to push out all of these court cases as long as possible. So I expect to see Donald Trump, his attorneys are going to appear for him. He will not be in person, but they're going to try to push this trial out as long as possible.
And it's interesting because it looks like they want to go for quite an early trial date.
It depends. So the prosecutors absolutely do want to go for an early trial date. Prosecutors are ready to try this case. They've been working on it for 2 years. They're ready to go, but the Trump team has said, hey, let's push out these cases. There's so many of them now. There's 4. Let's push them out until as late as 2026. Of course, you've got to consider that maybe they're banking on President Trump or former President Trump to become President Trump again, and that in that case, he could give himself pardoning authority as president. So it would behoove him to push this trial out as long as possible.
And is all this legal action and all the different charges that he's facing, is that still playing into Trump's hands at the moment?
Politically?
Yeah,
absolutely. It absolutely is still playing into his hands. We've seen after every indictment, poll numbers going up, more support heading his way. But we might be starting to see a trend in the other direction. We've just seen a change in the polls. Now, we just had a debate televised. He refused to participate in it of the other Republican candidates. And we've seen him go down slightly in the numbers, but he still has a lead by about 30 points towards any closest opponent.
Now, I was reading earlier on that there is a group of conservatives who are looking at a potential legal challenge to say that Donald Trump actually isn't eligible to stand for president because of the insurrection. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely, yes. So there is a clause in our Constitution in the 14th Amendment, and it is essentially it's the disqualifying clause. It says that if you commit an insurrection against the country, that you are no longer eligible to run for office. And this clause was put into place right after the Civil War in America. So it is meant to keep people from who attempted to overturn the country from running the country. And certainly there's a hefty argument to be played, and we'll see it play out in court, that Donald Trump actually was a participant and did try to overthrow the democratic process and thus the country.
I mean, I feel exhausted just reporting on all of this. You just wonder what it must be like for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and we've heard, from sources too. The New York Post has heard that there have been a changing of emotions of him. As it started out, there was a lot of energy behind it, but this latest indictment, I mean, he just had his last of 4 expected indictments this year happened in Georgia, and this time he actually became the first U.S. president to ever take a mugshot for a jail. He hadn't had to do that in prior states and prior areas when he went for booking, but we're told that really took a knock to his ego.
That's interesting because we know immediately, don't we, off the back, he started using that as a fundraising opportunity. I was reading that,
absolutely.
$47 and you can get a T-shirt emblazoned with his mugshot on it.
Yes, and it's so funny to me because the picture on there is the mugshot, and it says never surrender. Well, what he actually did when he took that mugshot was he surrendered to the courts. That's actually the term that we use. And so he's putting his mugshot on these cups and mugs, and it says never surrender. But yeah, I mean that's the genius, if you will, of Donald Trump. He can make a buck, and he can make publicity out of anything.
Mm.
A Teflon Don is what they call him.
And I've seen lots of memes that have been made as a result of the mugshot. I wonder if the Democrats can use that to their advantage as well.
I think they absolutely could, but I don't think they will. Um, Donald or Donald Trump is facing off against. I mean, Joe Biden is really the only legitimate Democrat that's in the race. Nobody really wants to challenge him, and Joe Biden is just trying to take the high road and not make many attacks on Trump. He had a funny statement on Friday. They asked reporters at the White House asked him what he thought of the Trump mugshot, whether he had seen it, and Joe Biden said, "Handsome guy."
One response, I suppose. And you mentioned about the polling, there'd been a slight dip for Trump. Clearly,
Mhm.
Trump's base is always going to support him, no matter what charges he faces. I'm just
Right.
wondering, in light of the increasing charges, the mugshot coming out, what effect that's having on wider Republican voters who aren't natural Trump voters and indeed swing voters. Do we know that yet?
You know, yes, largely Republicans as a whole support him as their candidate, but we're starting to see this recognition coming on among Republicans and swing voters and somewhat moderates. As we get national poll numbers, the majority of Americans say they absolutely would not vote for Donald Trump in the election. And so Republicans and Donald Trump supporters are going to have to come to a reckoning, I think. You're going to have to look at it and say, okay, do we want an electable candidate? Do we want to get somebody into the White House that can win? Or do we just want to put Donald Trump and hope to God that the right people come out and he will be the new president?